Okay. All right. Where were we? We were stating that at the name of this draft lecture, because of the various different questions that are coming in concerning the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and concerning the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo, or some say Tewahedo or Tewahedo, but Tewahedo Church, we decided to entitle this lecture and this draft lecture the Ethiopic Church. We could say the ancient Ethiopic Church, just to qualify and to put into context exactly which church we are speaking about, versus the counterfeit Ethiopian Orthodoxy, or for maybe the purposes of this lecture, we'll say simply the Ethiopic Church versus counterfeit Orthodoxy, because the Ethiopians are not the only one who have been assimilated by the Borg. You know what I'm saying? The assimilation of the Borg. You know what I'm saying? The Borg relates to the Borgias, or the Borgias, Cesare Borgia, and we have gone into some detail, and there's a lot of information on how Caesar Borgia, the image, has become the present pseudo-historical whitewash counterfeit version of Jesus Christ that many people in various different cultures have been assimilated to believe or belie Eve, in other words, to believe and belie the truth that the counterfeit, in other words, they've accepted the Antichrist, Jesus, or Jesus. So that's the Borg, the Borgias. You have to understand that right there. So that's also part of that counterfeit Christianity, but for the purpose of this lecture, since the questions that are coming in are concerning the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. You understand? What about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church? Many want to know. And here's what is difficult for most who are unlearned. You understand? Unlearned and also unstable as far as in the truth to really distinguish is the true church, that the fact that the true church and the counterfeit church, in a sense, occupies almost one and the same space. This is what a lot of folks can't really recognize, but this is exactly what the Bible is telling us about those who are true Christians or Christians in truth, and those who are counterfeit Christians. If you study the New Testament of the Bible, especially the pastoral epistles of Paulos and even the Gospels, we hear of a counterfeit nature to the devil's works in God's name. That there's a counterfeit nature to it. We have this with the Jews and Yahoshua. You understand? We have this with the early Christianity. And in order to more properly address this sort of point, that's the first place that we need to, first of all, go to, and we need to distinguish. And what do we mean by the ancient Ethiopic Church? Now, this is a conspiracy. There's been a conspiracy that's been going on within the Ethiopic Church for more than 1,600 years. A relative point about this, and hopefully we'll get some time to touch on this in this lecture or perhaps another lecture, the overflow of this particular lecture, is autocephaly, or self-governing, self-autonomy within the church that His Imperial Majesty, Kedus was able to facilitate. In other words, where he brought the Ethiopic church out of the Egyptian Orthodox domination, or out of from underneath the Egyptian church. You know, so that's another area that needs to be touched on. That this is not a new conspiracy, but it's been going on for 1,600 years. Now, needless to say, most native Ethiopians, though they know something is wrong, most native Ethiopian Christians especially know something is wrong, especially with this present generation in the church, Papacho Diablos, Abatacho Diablos, Menamin, and so forth and so on. So they know something is wrong, but they can't really seem to identify when did it go wrong, when did it start, or really what is the truth. They know something is wrong, but they're not able to identify really what it is that is right, because in order to do so, you need to have some sort of standard or some sort of measurement to measure by. In other words, I like to use this example often, and I think is an appropriate example, is counterfeiting money, for example, counterfeit money. The only way that anyone knows a counterfeit dollar bill or a counterfeit denomination of money is by looking at an original or anything that's counterfeit. In order to know what's a counterfeit, you must have some idea of what the genuine article or the genuine thing, whatever it is. So if you never really have gotten to know what a true dollar bill is, then you most likely will become vulnerable to counterfeiters and to counterfeit currency. You understand? And this is what has gone on in Christianity too, a counterfeit currency, a current. You understand? It's not the true spirit, but it's a counterfeit spirit that pretends, you understand, makes believe that it's the true spirit. But when we now compare the works and the so-called fruit of the counterfeit spirit, when we compare this, as judge a tree by its what? Fruit, right? Every tree is judged by its fruit. And when we compare now the fruit of the counterfeit spirit, or the other gospel, the other Jesus, so to speak, and the other spirit, which is the counterfeit spirit, to the true or the genuine article, this is where it becomes evident the conspiracy, or this is where it becomes evident Bible prophecy. This is where it becomes evident exactly what's what and what's been going on, especially vis-a-vis the Ethiopic Church and counterfeit orthodoxy. So the next point that's also very important, and we're just laying out some basic, if this was like a book, it would need to be, the book would need to address certain basic points in order to give the reader or the student or those interested in the topic matter or the subject a better idea. Not just a better idea, a better understanding, but also a groundation. You understand? A foundation on it. This means that after they read this particular book or document, or after they listen to a well-presented lecture on this particular subject matter that we are going through a draft of right now, they will not learn anything different concerning the truth, whatever other information they get. They basically, the information that they get, if it's true, it will reflect the basic groundation. You see what I'm saying? But maybe they'll get more examples of it. You see, so we don't want to begin off with just examples, because there's many, many examples, and most folks, they get into examples. Well, this happened, and this happened that day, and it's like this, or it's like that. But what is it? This is why I said in the last days and times, we can deal with these issues bluntly. You understand? Directly. Now, the truth, of course, is an offense. Many will get offended. Some are just offended at even a subject matter, a draft subject matter of the Ethiopic Church versus counterfeit orthodoxy, or the Ethiopic Church, more correctly, versus counterfeit orthodoxy. But the truth, being offensive as it may seem to some to be, because they have a vested interest. You see, they're offended because they have a vested interest. The vested interest may be in the conspiracy, or the vested interest may be in the delusion. You see, so there's two basic kinds of vested interests. Some are offended because they have a vested interest in the conspiracy. They profit in some way, in some material, worldly way, from this make-believe. In other words, they are, like we used to say, the 85, what is it, the 85%, those who know what's going on, but they or the 10%, they're like the 10%, you understand? The 10% who basically know what's going on, or they are like the so-called 85%. You understand? The 85% are now the deluded, or the mass, those who are the believers, so so-called, they sincerely believe what they are being, the bill of goods, in other words, that they're being sold is the genuine thing. And they really have no clue that it's not. So they will also be offended. So before we even get into the so-called flesh and blood, so to speak, of the issue. We find it necessary to address some of the themes that need to be covered, some of the themes that need to be covered. I think it was a very, very important question that was presented, and I give thanks for that question, and it goes along with a lot of other similar questions that are presented concerning the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. You see, when one reads the history, for example, they get caught up in the nostalgia of the church, but then when they actually encounter certain things for themselves, besides things that are historical, they are greatly disillusioned. You understand? If they have a perceptive spirit to truth, like if the spirit of truth is in them, they are they're not deluded, but they are disillusioned because they say, "Wait, but this is not what I've read or what I've been studying and learned. This seems to be something different," because it is something different. It's a counterfeit. So that's what we're going to address at the outset.